mean, they're so beautifully written. And plus, he loves you doing welding. He calls her a kick-ass writer. Right up my alley, baby. So, and Peter was in Andre's writing room. So they will talk about that. I'm so thrilled to have them both here. Please help me welcome Peter Horner and Andre Dubus III.
Hello, is that on?
Are you on?
Is that on?
Yes.
I just had to say something about Nikki Hendrickson. So it was 14, 15 years ago. She read that the reading of literature among even college-educated adults in America had plummeted. And so she founded this festival, and this is her baby. And another round of applause, please. Peter, how are you? We're talking about the old man.
All right. Can you all hear? Is that mic good here? I need to speak up.
How about there?
How about that? Good. That's good?
Yeah.
Good. So I'm going to ask questions of Andre. I'm going to try. And then we're going to talk about Andre's. Does that sound good? So on my way here, I stopped for coffee in outside Manchester. In New Hampshire, and I was sitting and reading a little bit of an essay by Andre about his father, and then reading some of Andre's stories in the cafe, and I happened to notice that a few tables over, there was a couple having a conflict, a pretty serious conflict. She was crying, and the guy was sitting across from her, not really what to do with his hands. And I was sitting there trying to prepare for this. You know, and I was just having this moment of, kind of being inside one of these Andre's stories where I became intensely curious, and as I tried not to invade their space, but I'm like, you know, and so, but I felt like I was, I was torn between thinking about Andre and getting ready to talk to you, and also thinking about the things that he would have been preoccupied with, probably about me. But also kind of wanting to understand. And I will say just the last thing, but it got more complicated than just her being upset and then being in a fight. At one point he kind of came over and gave her a hug, and then he just kept getting more and more complicated, and I don't know exactly what happened. But it struck me. And the other thing I'll say is I was outside as I'm signing books, and I happened to take a look at where the Bible was open today. John 16, which says, the first line is, I have said all this to keep you from falling away. And that struck me too. I've said all this. I'm a Jew, what do we do? And so I thought just keeping talking about these stories is a way of keeping from falling away, from us all falling away, not just them. Can I ask you, so we're here to ostensibly celebrate the reissue of the collected stories of use, and that David Godin has brought out in a beautiful new 3-volume edition, which you all should have, if not already. And I want to just ask you, Andre, what's it been like? I mean, I know just from reading essays and talking to you that you often are reading from it, but what's it been like to kind of be part of the process of putting together this pretty major event of this 3-volume reissue?
Well, first, Josh Bogwell was the editor of this 3-volume set, and I did very little except my sister Suzanne and I are executives, my co-executives of our dad's literary estate. We really just gave permission and our blessing and did very little. We did all the work, including getting 3 wonderful contemporary writers to write introductions, and Richard Russo and Tobias. I got to tell you though, one of the most profoundly beautiful moments of this reissue is that my dad's never had any of his books made into audiobooks, and that's primarily because people do not read short stories the way they read novels and nonfiction books. And they asked me be the narrator for 3 of the series. And I gotta tell you, man, I've been rereading his work. I teach his work all the time in that school. I just made copies of my favorite story of his, Killing, last night for 34 students, and we're in the semester, reading the master. But to get to your question, it's reading these stories. Life is so damn beautiful. I'm reading these stories and I realize I am older than the man who wrote them. I'm older than the man who wrote them. But he was my dad. Because he wrote so derivatively from his own life, I recognize characters from who they really came from. I recognize my foremother, his first ex-wife. I recognize this and that. And so I'm reading it on that level, but I'm also reading it as a writer too. And whenever I read my father's work, I am filled with all sorts of emotions, but primarily pride. He would be the first to tell you that he spent his 62 years on the planet putting the best part of himself into his writing. And he would say that. He wasn't always proud of it. But thank God, because he's left behind such a beautiful body of work. So there's a feeling of great pride, and also there are some darker feelings that come up too, which we can get to.
I mean, I guess maybe along that, perhaps that, but not exclusively. I mean, I'm wondering for you, I mean, just how it must be so strange to read this work. And I'm wondering, do you separate yourself from how your inside view of this work? But as a working writer, I want to talk about like sentences. And how you made them so oddly. I mean, let's get to that in a minute. But how do you separate, or do you? Or are there moments where you sort of have like where you're able to just read it without kind of knowing the context of that?
No, it's really hard for me. Well, no. Look, I'm assuming that most of the people in this room are here because you know my dad's work. And if you don't, you're in for a treat. I do want to do a brief reading from one of his pieces, and I think Peter might too. It's hard to separate, but because he was so good, I do forget. I forget he was my father. I just become the people of the story because he wrote with such depth and compassion. Not always a lack of writing, which we can talk about, but for the most part, no joke. And but he's one of my favorite writers. And the truth is, it has not been easy. It's the first 20 years to be the son of a great writer with the same name who doesn't write as well. And I said to him once, hey, old man, I read all 90-something of your short stories, and I noticed not one character's name repeats itself. But you have your first son, you can't come up with a different name. Jesus! But the feeling now, especially after he's been gone for 20 years, is just immense pride at what he's left behind. And so I am able to separate myself out, although he is in everything he ever wrote, more than most writers I can read.
Yeah, that's why it just must seem especially challenging. But if that happens, that's a fascinating thing, because at a certain point, he is your father, but at a certain point, he's also. Oh, I'm sorry. Terry Rose. I think it's because it's too high. How about that? There you go. Okay. Why don't we read? We're going to read one full story, right?
Yeah.
Two pages to that, and I was going to do the introduction to another story.
This is from my father's final collection of short stories. Just a brief bio, you guys. He published 10 books in his lifetime, which when he was 18 years old, his goal was to publish 10 books. And he did. One novel, he was not a novelist, he was a short story writer. 7 collections of short stories and 2 collections of personal essays. This is from his final book of stories, which came out a few years before he died. This is just 2 pages long, and it's called At Night. She always knew she would be a widow. Why, even before she was a bride, when she was engaged, she knew in moments when she imagined herself very old, saw herself slow and lined and gray in a house alone, with photographs of children and grandchildren on a mantelpiece with 5 what women did, and she glimpsed it over the years as she glimpsed her own death. She had the children and the grandchildren, and some of the grandchildren moved to other states, but most of them stayed, and all her children did, close enough to visit by car, and they came to her too, and filled her little house. The photographs hung in the bedroom and in the hall, and were on the mantel above the fireplace. She was 77, and her husband was too, and by now she had buried her parents and his, and a sister, and 2 of his brothers, and so many friends, and they had begun in their 30s, burying friends who were taken young. So she knew death was inside of her, inside him too. Something in her body would change, would stumble and fall, or stop, or let go, and something in his would. She did not want to lie helpless in bed for a long time in pain, and she did not want him to, but she knew it was the way. You went to a doctor because of some trouble your body couldn't leave behind. Then you were in the hospital. Then you came home and took medicine and died. Her life ending worried her very little, for here she was each morning with him. He was long retired from the post office, and he ate breakfast and went for a walk in good weather, sometimes even in the cold when one of her sons shoveled the driveway and the sidewalk and poured rock salt so they wouldn't slip and fall and break a bone. And they went to the children and grandchildren, and the children and grandchildren came to them, and there was the house to keep, and the cooking, and their garden, and friends for a visit. They had plots in the cemetery, and she knew everything that had to be done. She had 4 children, and when she called them with news, she started with the firstborn, then the next, and so on to the last. And this is how she planned to phone them after she called the doctor, when whatever was coming to her husband came. Then she would watch as in the hospital bed, and then in their bed he shrank and died. And near the end, the family would all gather to see him alive. Then he would not be, and she would be alone in the house with the telephone and the car and the children coming to see her. But on the summer night when he died, while she slept, probably while he slept too, she woke in the cool dark. The windows opened, and a pale light in the sky, and the birds singing. And she knew before she turned to him, and she did not think of her children or of being alone. She rolled toward him and touched his face, and her love went out of her into his cooling skin, and she wept for what it had done to him, crept up and taken him while he slept and dreamed. Maybe it came out of a dream, and the dream became it. Wept, lying on her side with her hand on his cheek, because he had been alone with him, surprised, maybe confused now as he wandered while the birds sang, seeing the birds, seeing her lying beside his flesh, touching his cheek, saying, "Oh, hon." I did want to say something about Peter Horner. This is a beautiful American writer right here. Collection of stories called Maggie Brown and others, and I'm nearly done with it, and I don't want to be done with it because every page is a gem. And one of the stories is an homage to this masterpiece I just read to you all. And it's the hours after the woman. It's not these characters, but anyway, I just want to toast Peter for having done that.
Thanks for reading that. And, could you talk a little bit about how Andre's style changed, in this last book? And that story, I think, is one representative of that, as well as some others too.
The sentence is like,
his style changes. Yeah. Right? How did you see that?
Well, oh man. While I was reading that to you, I was hoping you would all go read it yourselves later, because I had this conversation, a couple of conversations with my dad about punctuation. And I wish to Christ exactly what he said, but he said, oh, I figured out the perfect sentence. I said, what? And it was something like this. Introductory clause, comma, splice, semicolon, dash, comma, period. I said, what in the hell are you talking about, old man? But he thought in those terms, and so you need to actually look, especially in Peter's right, the stories of the Scala collection, Dancing After Hours, because it's a master class on prose rhythm, sentence structure, voice, tone, style, down through sentence length and punctuation and other things that remain mysterious to me, right?
And I think almost a distillation, if that's the right term, of the style that you've been working towards. I mean, it's not like it doesn't exist earlier, but it's pared down in a way that's so, there's no other story like that. Even in Waiting or Leslie in California, some of the shorter pieces, there's nothing that kind of approaches that kind of compression. So I'm always struck by that and everything else Dancing After Hours, to be honest. I wanted to ask you about, and this gets to the sentence issue, I think. But what I've been noticing when reading this new movie issues is the patience in the line. And I was wondering just if you had thoughts about sort of, people sometimes, and he himself brought this on, he talked a lot about Hemingway, he wrote about Hemingway. His Faulkner is closer to
Faulkner,
in terms of the ways in which he could do backflips to get back to applause earlier. So I'm wondering, when you're rereading, how does that play into it in terms of just patience especially? Because it seems like that, to me, plays a role.
I want to share with you, like beautifully said. His brother in style was more Faulkner than Hemingway. Hemingway was a very painterly writer with those beautiful, short, simple declarative sentences he made absolute poetry with. I know my old man loves Hemingway's work, but he preferred short stories, which he considered better than a lot of people do, than his novels. But Faulkner, who was also a Southern writer, my old man was from Louisiana, South Louisiana, which totally informed his entire life. There are three things that informed his life. Being a Southerner, he fled the South, he hated the South, mainly for racism. And also, I think he fled his family for reasons that are still mysterious to me, but I have theories I'll keep to myself. The South, the Marine Corps, that's how he escaped. He joined the Marines. He told me many times that he's written this to prove to his father that he was not a sissy. He was a man. And as soon as his father died, my father quit the Marines a day later. The random captain. Okay, Dad, now you know, man, I'm going to go to the workshop there in the face. I'm going to go be a sissy little writer boy now. And the other thing was God, his Catholic religion. We cannot have this conversation about my father's work or him without bringing up his Catholic faith. I don't think he would have his art would not be his without being a Catholic and a Christian, but primarily I think maybe, I don't know if he's more Catholic than Christian. But you guys, he went to Mass 7 days a week before he wrote. That was his ritual. And as you may know, he was run over and crippled 12 years before he finally died, but he spent the last 12 years of his life in a wheelchair. He'd stopped on the highway to help someone, got run over at 15 miles an hour. And then all the writing after, we have to talk about that too, because the writing came after having been disabled totally. By the way, my father would not use the word disabled. He would not. He had 34 broken bones. He had a quarter in his pocket that I had for years and I lost. I think it's because I lost it. The quarter was bent at a 90-degree angle. He was run over at 15 miles an hour. He lost both legs. One leg was pulverized, the other was amputated. And I went to, he was in the hospital for 12 weeks in Pastrigo. And one day, I was in my 20s and I ran up the stairs to see him and I came in and he was really down and he kept calling himself a cripple. And I said, Dad, come on, that's such negative. People don't call that now. We don't use that word. You're physically challenged. He said, screw you, you're physically challenged. You just ran up the stairs, breathing hard, I'm crippled. But it was the rightest nature of euphemism. And anyway, to your question about, what's your question? Whatever.
So, I was wondering if you'd read, because I want to go back in time. Okay, well, I'm going to read the beginning of Rose, which is a story I've been spending a lot of time with in the last week or so, so it's been on my mind. Rose is, I think, one of Andre's most devastating stories. It's from the 1986 collection, The Last Worthless Evening. This was before the accident. And it's a story that ostensibly deals with child abuse and a mother's response to a father's extreme level of child abuse. The story starts like this, and I think that's a reduction in the story. It's often how it's talked about. Even there's a sense in an interview he himself said that very thing. The story's about so much more. I'll just read the first paragraph. Sometimes when I see people like Rose, I imagine them as babies, as young children. I suppose many of us do. We search the aging skin of the face, the unhappy eyes and mouth. Of course, I can never imagine their fat little faces at the breast, or their cheeks flushed and eyes brightened from play. I do not think of them after the age of 5 or 6, when they are sent to kindergartens, to school. There, beyond the shadows of their families and neighborhood friends, they enter the world a second time, their eyes blinking in the light of it. They will be loved or liked or disliked, even hated. Some will be ignored, others singled out and hated and abused that, with a few adult exceptions, only children have the energy and heart to inflict. Some will be corrupted, many without knowing it, save for that cooling quiver of conscience when they cheat and they lie to save themselves, when out of fear they side with bullies or teachers, and so forsake loyalty to a friend. Soon they are small men and women with our sins and virtues, and by the age of 13, some have our vices too.
Damn.
That's the opening.
That's the opening.
Yeah.
He's got to keep it, he sets the bar there and he maintains it. And then he actually goes above it.
Could you walk us through back to his fate? Because I feel like this story of almost all of you, it's always there. But and how, it's a two-part question. One is how faith might play and how this works. And the other thing is do you think that, I mean, this is, you don't see this lately. Lately,
When you say this, what do you mean?
I mean, somebody wearing their faith and their, I mean, Rose has moments of possible preachings, in a way that is so dangerous in our work, and he's willing to go there. And I'm wondering if you could talk about morality in his work and how he wasn't shy about it.
Yeah, and that's what I meant when I talked about the dark parts and the judgment. But the judgment that would sometimes seep into the sentences were not of individual people, they were of actions. And he brought his own flaws, which he would be the first to admit were many, to that. One of my favorite lines about all of this is Flannery O'Connor in her posthumously published collection, it'll come to me, what's the date of the title? Mystery Manners. And I believe it's her essay writing short stories. She has this line: "A writer's beliefs are not what she sees, but the light by which she sees," which is so profound and beautiful, and it reflects the truth. I quote her because, in rereading my father's work in preparation to narrate the audiobook, some of it, and rereading lately to teach him to my own students, I am so struck by that Flannery quote when it comes to the old man, because for years he would say in interviews, "I write because I don't know what it's like to live without God. So I write from the point of view of people who don't have God." And I remember I was most angry at the time. I said, "Why don't you just freaking ask me, Dad? I'll tell you what it is. Why don't you take me to church?" I didn't say that. But an image keeps coming to me. I have to share with you guys as you're asking these really wonderfully astute questions about the craft beer. My father was a really complicated, complex man. He was a carouser and a womanizer, do. But what I want to share with you is this image. I think his most powerful decade of writing was the decade he wrote that novella and many others. I will tell you, he wrote steadily. He didn't write a lot. He would write every day in a journal, and then he would record the words. He would count the words. And whether he got 50 words or 1,200, he would always write after that, "Thank you." And he was thanking God. He was thanking God for the words. He would write and publish 3 stories every year consistently from his 30s up to about age 50 when he got run over. But what I want to share with you is an image of, throughout most of his 40s, he would listen to opera and he would write in a Japanese kimono. He lived on canvas houses, right? One time a week, you're right out of the closet, all the way over. And so many times I visited him, and his third wife, Peggy, I'd say, "Is he writing?" Yeah. And I could hear it. It was Pavarotti. It was like before Puccini, and an aria was playing. And then he'd come out and give me a hug, and he'd be in this blue kimono with bare legs, and he'd go up for iced tea, and he'd go back down, and now that image really moves me. It actually moved me then, but it really moves me now. Writing for him was a sacred practice. And you're right, I can't think of anyone, maybe Flannery O'Connor in some way, but he was not of this time.
I mean, the moralizing in Rose, again, you have to read it, I think, I believe in the context of the character, which is not the writer, ever, even though there are moments where you feel like that's extremely close, and, as you mentioned. But it does feel like when the narrators moralize, it's out of their own flaw. It's a character flaw of the character on the page, but he goes so dangerously close. I mean, there's moments in Rose where he goes after rich people and what they'll do and won't do, and he gets often general, but it's so beautifully weaved into the narrative that it gets away. Okay, but nobody's willing to do this.
I can't think of any writer, and I do want to speak a bit about the passage you read. Incredible, right? That was the first paragraph. It occurred to me while you were reading this, and I've read this during the times, but not lately, is he was not afraid to wear his wisdom on his sleeve. And there's real value to that. The truth is, you live a certain amount of years, you learn some things. And I do think that that's part of the strength of his gift. But he also did it as a younger writer. There was, I read a description, there was a review of one of my dad's books, he was still alive, and I remember this line, Dubus's prose, I'm going to butcher the line, but basically, talk about the gravitas and the seriousness of it. And he said, you get the feeling as if he's moving one heavy box to one room and then another heavy box to another. And I thought that was an apt description. But the old man always took on weighty subjects. Yeah.
This is more practical, more. I was talking to my wife as I was preparing for this, and she said something. She said, Andre taught me that when I'm cleaning, that I got to finish one room before I move on to the next, or I can't move on to the next room. It's from adultery. According to her, I haven't double checked this, but this is what she said. She said that that's what she learned from him. And then I thought, to me, in just a similar idea, I will never, and you would have to shoot me for me not to bring the cart back to at the grocery store, the cart back inside. I never leave it in the parking lot, even if there's a parking lot slot. And that is from a story in Dancing After Hours where somebody judges somebody for doing that in a pretty nasty way. When I see someone doing it, I think of him and I think of a thunderbolt coming down. But I still, can you talk about the connection between the weighty subjects and his down-to-earth practical? I mean, in Rose, just for example, the child abuse. upset because the diapers are all over. You know, he was always down on the ground. You know, can you talk about the weight versus the ground?
Yeah, thank you, because, so the weight versus the ground, and the ethereal versus the earthly. He was very, look, you can't separate the man from his art. He had an earthy existence. He loved women and drinking and eating and running, and he had legs, and yet he read philosophy and Thomas Merton and the Bible, and all of that is in his work. And Anton Chekhov was his literary mentor. He discovered, and I bring Chekhov up because no other, maybe Chekhov's the one who comes closest to what the old man did. And my father was very humble, incredibly humble. He would never, ever wear any of his accomplishments on his sleeve. He was never, not one molecule of him would gloat or boast. But I know that it was deeply pleasurable to him when later in his career he would be referred to as America's Chekhov, because Chekhov was the writer who got my father to turn to the short story. My father, I'm going to get to your question, but my father began, like so many writers, trying to send in a novel, and because that's what we do. That is a more celebrated form in this country and has been for decades. And his first and only novel was a beautiful book I love called The Book, came out in 1967. And right that summer, when we were still living together as a family of six, my parents had not yet divorced, they would about a year later, he discovered the work of Anton Chekhov. And after reading just a few stories, he threw the novel he'd been working on for 2 years. He threw this novel away. He said, I'm going to do what Chekhov did. He said because Chekhov, in 3 scenes, has done what so many novels in 500 pages haven't done. And the reason I bring up Chekhov is he was a master of the ethereal and the earthly. If you haven't read Chekhov or reread him, you might want to read him in tandem with the old man, because that's a lovely feast of the soul. You know, I just, you know, you're asking me these wonderful craft and art questions, but I keep seeing my father. I knew him for many years, and I see the dance in his life between the earthly and the ethereal, between misbehaving and not misbehaving. You know, look, he was one of the most generous human beings I've ever met. He could be selfless, and he could also be one of the most self-absorbed SOBs I ever met. And I say that with love and forgiveness, and he was great. He had 1,000 people at his funeral, not because he was a famous writer, but because they loved him. And if there was more room in that church, he would have more people there. Anyway, I get off tangent, but yeah.
What was it about Chekhov? First of all, I want to say, I mean, if you haven't read The Town, and not just on the issue of your father, but it's the book itself. You know, you need to do it right now and leave this conversation. But that said, what was it? What do you think it was about? I mean, in one of your essays, you actually mentioned, you actually say that he was reading Chekhov at the duel, and that he just said, forget it, I'm going to teach myself how to write. And what do you think he was seeing in that work? Because I think the word Chekhov was thrown around a lot. You know, there's a scene in Woody Allen movie where it goes, I want to write like Chekhov. I mean, what is that? What did it mean? What did he mean to him?
I think that and you can hear it if you have not had the pleasure of reading my dad's work. Certainly you heard it in the 2 passages or the 2 readings that Peter and I just did. He was a poet in heart. There was a real poet in the man. And to me, that's the highest praise. William Faulkner said when the writer first tries his hand at writing, he tries poetry. And when he fails at that, he tries a short story. And when he can't do that either, he ends up writing novels. and I love that, because I do think, right, for a poem to be great, every letter, every word's got to be right where it is. For a short story to be great, every word, every sentence got to be right where it is for it to be great. But we've all read novels that really need to lose 200 pages, but they're still great novels. It's a more forgiving form, right? So I think that, missing my father so much right this second. He loved the compression of the truth. I can't tell you how many times I've heard him say over his lifetime, look what he did in one scene. Look how many scenes. One of the things my father would do, and no one does this, no writer I've ever heard of does this. His final thing he would do on a story is he would read the entire story into the tape recorder, back when we had these set tapes. And I have all these. I have them. I didn't give them to the archives, and screw you, that's for me. And my kids, and grandkids. And he would read the story into the tape recorder, then play it back, looking for any flaws in prose rhythm or word repetition the eye didn't catch. It was his final, for any cabinet makers in the room, it was like a 440 sandpaper you put on a polyurethane cabinet. It was such perfectionism. And a word that comes to me that I learned from one of his stories is lapidary. Jeweler. He was like a jeweler. And so, and honestly, there were novels he read from Florida that he admired, but he really even preferred to read the short story. And I think that's what it is, to answer your question, the compression and the poetry, and that's what he achieved. Although what's interesting, as you know, Rose is really a novella. He was also really good, my father, at the novella form, 50 to 125 pages. In fact, I never told you this. Before he died, when he died, he was between projects when he died in February 1999. So he left nothing behind. But he was getting ready. He'd actually gotten an advance from Knopf for his next book, and he wanted it to be, this is how he described it. He said, I want to write a 125-page masterpiece. And that's what he wanted, 125 pages. And he said, I'm starting to get, this is how he would talk about it. He said, I'm starting to get pregnant with it. And he would talk about that too. He said, I would get an idea, but then I needed to gestate. I need to gestate. And then he wouldn't begin writing until he could see the first two scenes. He said, when I can see the first two scenes, I know I'm ready to start giving birth to this and start writing it. So when he died, suddenly, of a heart attack in the shower, age 62, he was getting pregnant with what he'd hoped would be a 125-page, multiple point of view masterwork. And I have no doubt that if he had lived, he would have done just that.
And I think that some people might argue that he did it,
Father,
no,
voices from the dead. Oh, yes.
But as somebody's written about this number, how do you see, somebody asked me this today, like what is the difference between a long story? I mean, I know we can talk about this for 10 hours and probably run chase art, but
make the coffee.
that's it, everybody. But how do you see that 100, what is it about? I mean, and somebody who's done it, and yeah.
Well, I'll speak more for him, because we did talk. Here, let me just say, I did not, so foolishly, did not talk to my father about writing until like the last year of his life. Because I got so much daddy shadow crap that people would, I published something, did your father help me? No, I didn't even read it yet. And honestly, I had a lot of doors shut for years. My first book went to 39 publisher, second to 30, whatever. And my point is, so out of pride, I am confessing to you, I said, I'll be goddamn, I'm going to ask him a question. I'm doing this myself. And you know what broke the ice? I was reading, my father's first cousin is a beautiful crime writer, James Lee Burke. And I'm reading one of Burke's novels, and there's a, Robichaux's got a gun to the bartender's head, and the bartender says, I don't know nothing, comma. I work for tips, comma. I'm not shitting ya. Probably don't win. I got a degree in sociology and political science. I'm not an English major. I called my father. Dad, I read him like, these are commas between complete sentences. Can you do that? Oh yes, son. It's called a comma splice. Oh, what the hell? And that opened, so think about it, a month later, I said, Dad, let's talk about point of view. What do you know? And so, it's one of those conversations we're talking about the longer form. And I think this is why he would go from that incredibly compressed poem I read you at night, 2.5 pages long, to a 100-pager. He said, I never know what I'm saying on it, right? But then, if another character starts to tug at my sleeve, I have to let them talk. And then that's how it evolves into something longer. I like to tell you this though. So I went to the University of Texas in Austin in the 70s, and I was in the bookstore, and I'm 20 years old. And there's a Paris Review on the shelf, and I see my father's name on the cover. And I knew enough that was a hoity-toity place to publish, and so I picked up, I didn't have the money to buy it, but I read this story called Waiting, 7 pages long, from the point of view of a newly widowed wife. Right? Yeah, Juanita. I'm reading this story, and then I start to weep. 20 years old, looking actually for beer money somehow. And my eyes are filling up. I go right to a phone booth. Remember phone booths? I called Colette because I didn't have any money. The old man answered. I said, Dad, I just read that story. Wait, what the hell? You're pretty good at this, you know. All right, I hadn't read enough of this stuff. And he said, oh yeah, that took me 14 months. That 7-page story took you 14 months? Yeah, it was actually 160 pages. He said, Dad, you cut it down to 7 pages? He said, I had to write all that to find it. The only thing here is 7 pages. And it is that kind of discipline and frankly, ignorance of the marketplace and disdain of the marketplace that I so admire. He was a true artist. And read that story, Waiting, which might be interesting. I'll find it.
And just at the end of Waiting, what he found in the 7 pages was not what he'd been looking for. That's how it, the character who ends up being the guy in bed, the she brings home.
The dude she brings home. There are a lot of stories where dude she brings home. It's not in this one.
Well, I'm sure we want to open it up for questions. I can tell that notes that could go on for many days, but I will. I think we should open it up, right?
Yes, let's open it up.
So, do people have thoughts,
questions, comments? I'll read you another story. I'll tell you.
Yes. Oh, Joyce Maynard.
I want to know from both of you how, with such a powerful and haunting mentor, you managed to liberate yourselves to find your own writing voices to cope with that.
Good question. How have you, with such a powerful mentor, found your own writing voices? After you, Mr. Warner. No, you've got to read Maggie Brown and others. He's going to get mad at me for doing this, but it is such a piece of work. Anyway.
It's hard to answer, especially sitting here, right? Because I had a very complicated relationship with my own father, as I'm sure everybody here in this room can relate to. And when I found Andre, I knew Andre after his accident, and I was one of those people who sort of, I'll just briefly tell you, he had this workshop in his house after his accident, in part because the story I've always understood it, that he wanted to give something back to all the help that he'd been given when he was hurt and needed help, especially raising money when he didn't have enough health insurance to help his family at the time of the accident. And one of the ways in which he felt to give back was to open up his house for writers, punks like me. I wasn't anything, right? And a guy in that group was moving to Seattle, and he said, I got to see Andre's Dubus' workshop at his house. Do you want it? I said, yeah. So he gave me Andre's number, and I called and left a message. And Andre called me and left a message. He said, he growled into the phone. He goes, you can only be in the group if you're over 25 and not in grad school. Click. At the time I was, 23 and in grad school. So I was in law school of all things, and I kept that from him for 3 or 4 years. And when I told him, he was like, what are you talking about? He liked lawyers, he wanted to talk about law, he talked about the ADA and stuff, and he ended up getting a kick out of it. He was so surprised that I was hiding. I had this cover story that I was working with Cambridge YMCA, and and without, I wouldn't do what I do. I'm Gina Burial, people that are incredibly important to me, and his own work. I mean, and it is even strange for me to separate the man from the work, but the work is just something else. It's just, and we can talk till we're blue in the face, but you gotta feel it to know it. And I do feel like there is something different about reading it now, especially now, not just politically, God knows it's sort of second sentence, but just the patience in the line, it's not out there nearly as much. And so I feel a great weight reading his work, and I feel very special. That's what I feel reading it.
I love that story. I don't consider him a mentor, except this is where I'm full of shit. I grew up with my mom after age 10. They split up, and it was a 70s divorce. He was not a deadbeat dad. He gave us child support. He gave us probably half his income. He was financially poor most of his life while creating this art. But it was a 70s divorce, and then, the father picks you up for a couple hours on Sunday and drops you off. It was really like having a colorful uncle who just got out of jail. He was fun. And he was also, he was very gregarious, but he was also shy. One-on-one, he could be very shy. He was shy with us poor kids. Now, so for years, because I'm Hank Jr. of American Lit, I would totally deny, he had no influence, Joyce. Nothing, no mentor. I grew up with my mother. The mother never gets attention here. A single mother raising 4 kids alone. But here's where I'm full of it. Over the years, I've worked with these beautiful adult writers who started writing late. And I remember one lady who was in her 80s, and she was writing novels. She went on to publish in the late 80s. And I said, Helen, you're so good at this. Why have you not been doing this all your life? Oh, I had to wait for my parents to die, honey. They died 25 years ago, and I'm even worse. I feel like I'm looking over my shoulder. I said, well, why'd you have to wait? Because they don't want me to be starving and working as a waitress while trying to write a novel. They don't want me to suffer. And here's where my father was a profound influence and a sort of a spiritual mentor. Before my parents split up in the 60s, we always rented these tiny little houses. My father always had one room for his writing, and we would all have to be quiet while Daddy was writing. Years later, when I found myself as a young man stepping down the writing road, I had that image to turn to. That I watched a grown man go to a room to try to write something beautiful for someone he would never meet. And so for me, it felt as valid a choice to take as law school or business school or medical school or carpentry. It felt as valid a direction to take as anything. And that is his greatest influence for me, was modeling the life of a writer.
When you mentioned the picking you up, divorced dad, with your father, it's a story that just breaks my heart. And the shyness of that father character.
Can I get this a line from this story that went to your father, which is in one of his earliest collections, where the father has kids, and it's really deep from the point of view of his father, who always, my father would say he dated his children. He would pick us up, take us up where he drops us. And there's this moment, it's winter in the story, and the father gets in his car, and his windshield is fogged up, but he couldn't bring himself to scrape it, because he realized it was the breath of his children. Those kind of jewels are throughout every story he ever wrote. Why in the hell am I writing Jason's house? I forgot what book he is. It's not too late for me to know law school. Any other questions? Just kind of.
And what's the thought of writing a comic story, perhaps the two of you together?
No. No, what's your name? What's your name?
Mine, Dawn.
Tanya?
Dawn.
Dawn. I haven't. Well, I wrote this memoir called Town. It came out a few years ago, and I'll just share this with you. I had a really violent youth in the middle towns in the 70s, and for years I was trying to write about growing up in the 70s, Vietnam moving to a finish in high school, you too, right? And the drug use, a lot of absent fathers. And for years I tried to write it as a novel, and finally came as a memoir. And while writing the memoir, about 2 years into it, and 3 paragraphs, about 2 years into it became clear that my father's daily absence in our lives became a real predominant presence in the story. And I felt immediately guilty about it, and I wanted to cut it. The last thing, he was newly dead when I was writing this. I did not want to portray my dead father's not here to defend himself. I did not want to make him look like an absent father. But the truth is, he physically wasn't there. And as a father myself, it's helpful if you live in the same house as the kids. And, right? And so, what I'm trying to share with you, Don, is just that little bit that I allowed myself to write haunts me. I still get up at 3 in the morning, and I still feel guilty about how I painted my father in that memoir, because a lot of people have written letters about how they hate my father now. And one of the things I think I was fair in my treatment of him, but one of the things that I was aware of while writing this memoir is my father's not just, local plumber. He's a guy with an audience who adored, not just, we're kind of talking around this, but people who read his work change their lives. I met a man on a book tour, a priest who was a Wall Street broker, read my father's novellas, and joined the priesthood and became a priest. And so what I did not want to do, I didn't want to curse the loyalty after his parents. But the last thing I wanted to do, beyond disrespecting my father, the last thing I wanted to do was to hurt the relationship that my father's readers have with his beautiful work. But I wrote it anyway. And I'm done with that. I'm not doing it anymore. That's what I'm trying to do.
I teach a class at Dartmouth on nonfiction, and I use comedy as an example of, if you want to go places and be honest, to be honest is the most respectful thing you can do to a person. And it hurts, but God knows I'm grateful for it. My students always are.
Any more? Before you go buy a bunch of my dad's books? Yes, is that Leslie?
Yeah. Your father was a spiritual man.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about it?
About his spirituality?
Yes.
Do you want to take that first? All right. Good question. Next question, please. I don't want to take more time than we have. It's such a huge question. The only other human being I know who's as spiritual as my father was is his son, my brother. And maybe I know 2 or 3 others. And I'm not quite sure what I mean by spiritual. I don't quite know what it means for me. I do know that my father believed with all of his heart and soul that there is a God who loves us. There is a God who knows your name. I don't believe in God, but I do believe in the divine. The thing about the old man, and it's in the sentences you heard from us today, and it's in all of his work, is and this is what I love most about his work, and I think what I love most about him, is that there's a humility, like a literal humility, that this life we're living is a cosmic mystery, that who knows why we specks of dust are here. Why are we here? Where are we going? What's next? I visited my dad. He'd been crippled. Now I'm using his term, right? I don't usually use that, but he was in the wheelchair for years. And I went by his house in Haverhill to do a carpentry chore for him. And he was praying the rosary. And I've never touched the rosary. I don't know anything about the rosary. And he's smoking a cigarette and praying the rosary. He had both sides. He would have sex with a student on Tuesday, go to Mass on Monday. Wednesday. He was in his 70s, he wasn't as creepy as it is. He was also 85 years old when he was student. But listen, and he's doing the rosary, and I said, Dad, what the hell are you doing, man? Come on, pray. Do you do that every day? Oh, yes, sir. I pray for you and your wife and your kids. He said, I'm actually praying, I'm talking to my old man right now. He said, you're praying to your father? I said, I talk to while you're doing the rosary, I'm talking to him right now. And for me, that is the beginning of my understanding of spiritual life. It's one of open-hearted humility and a total egolessness that he could embody often, and I think he did every time he sat down to write. He did it as a man a lot, but who does? But he did it as an artist. Does that make sense? Why don't you try and
Vicky is giving us the sign. But I mean, I think what you said about your brother is like, says, I mean, if you're not going, I'm sorry, what I said about his brother being also as spiritual as his father, I think that speaks to what we're talking about here, that goes far beyond him being a writer, and yet that's how most of us know him.
Let me just, we'll end on this, I know we got to wrap it up. I want to, the reason I mentioned my brother's had a really hard life, a lot of suffering, which I won't go into because it's his business. But suffering that it's hard to even talk about. And you wouldn't know it when you talk to him. I'm not saying he puts on a cheerful face. He's the most resilient man I know. He sees life as just life. More than once my father would say to me, it's just life. Like there's something really bad about it. Oh, it's just life. Because he truly had faith there was something more. I want to end with an image, and then thank you all so much for listening so beautifully. My father died of a heart attack in the shower. The last time I saw him, I was going off to do my book tour for my novel House of Sacred Fog, and I went and saw him. I was remodeling my sister's house, and my father called me like 5 times that night to come over and watch a boxing match. And usually like 8 or 9 of us guys would watch a pay-per-view fight. Nobody was there. He called me 5 times when I'm trying to tile the floor at midnight. He said, you better come, you're going to regret it. You better come, you're going to regret it. You better come, you're going to regret it. And something to this day that I can only call the divine made me drop my tools, leave the grout in a bucket, let my chop saw stay dirty, and I'm a Virgo, I take care of that stuff. I got in the car, I drove to my father's house, we watched the fight. He talked about his father, told me stories he never told me. Just the two of us. Hadn't been the two of us in years. We kissed each other on the mouth the way we always did. I said, I love you. He said, I love you. He walks me out, it's like 2 degrees, and he's in like a t-shirt, and he just wheels out to his ramp, hugs me, says some nice things about the tour, off I go. My wife Fontaine calls me 2 days later. He had died. And the first thing that I wanted to do, my father's last story was a Western, and in it, the protagonist shows up on a horse, finds a dead man, builds a coffin, and digs a 6-foot grave in like 3 hours. My brother and I, who always worked in the trade, said, Dad, you've never worked a day in your damn life. Ain't no way, 200-pound man, you build a coffin in like half an hour, it's going to take like a day, 1,800 tools. And it's going to take 3 days to dig that grave. He said, well, you guys can build my coffin, you can dig at my grave. So, I fly home, hug my wife and children. My brother and I go to the lumber store. We come up with a materials list. We go to my brother's shop. We spend all night long building my father's coffin out of pine. My wife Fontaine and my mother take the satin sheet. I used to tease my dad. We slept in satin sheets. I said, Dad, it's okay to come out and be gay now. It's cool now. He just they took his satin sheets off his bed and they upholstered his coffin with the satin sheets. I lay in the coffin and asked my brother to close the lid. And then on opening day in April, we couldn't bury him because of the winter. Opening day of April, my dad was a big Red Sox fan. My brother and I, our best friend Bill Campbell, who was like a third son to my father, we dug his grave, and we would bust each other's, you know what, half an hour, 3 men, 8 hours. And when we finished it, I laid in the bottom of the grave and I looked up at that rectangle of blue. And I just want to end with this quote from a French writer named Léon Boyd. The night after staying up all night holding my dad's coffin, I go home to my wife Fontaine and our 3 kids who were young. And it was dawn, and I just wanted to get death off my mind, and I grabbed a Graham Greene novel off my shelf, In the Day Fair, beautiful book. And the epigraph to that novel is this. The reason I want to quote it to you is I think my father's entire life as a writer and a man embraced it. This is the quote. Man has places in his heart which do not yet exist, and into them enter suffering in order that they may have existence. Thank you.